Hello, it's been a while since I've recorded anything for the internet in a measurable length of time, and that's mostly due to the fact that I'm no longer a future librarian or aspiring librarian. As of January of this year, I was able to secure for myself. I guess it's technically December. I landed a position as a full time continuing academic librarian at a local college, and that's kind of been eating up a lot of my time. So my reading has gone down significantly, and like amount of spare time for reading, and like what I've been like picking to read in my spare time has kind of like been refined somewhat. I'm no longer able to just like read most of the current releases that just come out now. I'm more like spearheading and being like, okay, like if I want to spend more time reading fiction, for example, it's going to be like fiction written by like a diverse author, or it's in a particular topic or subject area that I'm more like wanting to learn more about or wanting to delve more into. So that's kind of fun. And then I guess just like in my own like recommendation bubble, it's kind of grown somewhat as like my colleagues have been recommending me more books, and I've been able to kind of take from them inspiration and take that forward with me as I read in my leisure time. And then too, like kind of a funny happenstance of going into this profession is I've picked up like fiber crafts and crafting, and so I've been doing a lot more of that in my spare time. And a little less reading, which is kind of fine because in my day to day, I do read extensively, like academic articles, emails, many emails, and then just general like keeping up to speed and what's happening in the profession. So that's kind of taken up a lot of my energy to power through books, which I'm sure will change as I move forward. But it's where we are today. So yeah, this video in particular is just going to be me addressing a few books that I'm excited to read in 2025, and it doesn't cover a couple of the pre-orders I have. I think there's one Indigenous text that I've got coming out in April called Ally is a Verb. It's on Strong Nations, which I highly recommend if you're looking for Indigenous texts. Check out the website Strong Nations. They do really great purchasing. And they also have excellent like tagging systems for like knowing if it's an Indigenous written book by an Indigenous author or knowing if it's just like about Indigenous subject matter. And then there's like I think Joe Abercrombie's book Demons is coming out in I think towards the summer of this year, and that's also I've pre-ordered it, so I know it's coming out, and I'll be looking forward to reading that as it comes out. But I don't have it, so I'm not going to mention it really in too much detail. So yeah, what have I been up to? I've read a few books. I read Once There Were Wolves, and that was like meh. I read The Cat Who Saved Books, which is a Japanese piece of fiction. That was pretty good. I've read a few other books, but like they've been pretty like not very standoutish. Apart from maybe The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, that was terrific. But these are the books that I'm looking forward to the most to read this year, and they're books that come to me as either like a recommendation from like my colleagues that I work with now, or like just kind of through the grapevine through my cohort that I graduated with. So yeah, I guess I'll just start. Right now, I'm halfway through Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. I was fortunate enough back in 2024, I believe it was like around October, November, to have attended one of Dr. Haidt's talks at University of British Columbia's Phil Lind Initiative, which if you are a UBC alum or student, you have access to for free to go and attend world-class lecture series by like fantastic professors that are excellent in their field. Jonathan Haidt is such for I believe it's sociology, and this text is one in which it addresses like children that were kind of born in 95 onwards and how the influence of social media and rise of technology has kind of affected their lives and made them a little more anxious. Not by a little, I think I'm kind of underscoring it or underselling it. It's like a lot. There's numbers, and it gets into kind of the effect on boys and girls, but it doesn't address, or at least has I think in total about 4 pages that addresses the mental health effect on transgender youths, which I think, and one of them actually like half a page is just as a footnote that you kind of have to flip around to find. So and he basically says, I think point blank, that like, oh, if the effect on boys and girls is astronomically high, then the effect on transgender children is manifold, even higher. And yeah, I kind of am a little bit like, if you are able to acknowledge in your text that there's this entire group of people that you're missing, maybe you should stop and dedicate at least like a couple chapters, maybe go back and visit that. because I think there's a lot to talk about there. So yeah, Jonathan Haidt, Anxious Generation, it kind of comes across at certain points as like man shouts at cloud in terms of like the amount of urgency he comes at his audience with. But I can see a lot of the fact that he's addressing in that, social media isn't really something that's meant to be for the benefit of people's mental health. It's something that is more detrimental, especially to young people, especially to young women. But then it's kind of like, well, then you're kind of neglecting the effect on young men, which I know it also that there is a prevalent kind of body image topic that needs to be addressed in that field too. So yeah, well, I'm about halfway, so I can't really critique it too much. But yeah, that's Jonathan Haidt, Anxious Generation. It's really good. It's kind of in the same vein as another book that I read last year called Stolen Focus, which I think he actually cites in this book, which is really rewarding to see. So yeah, just if you're kind of interested in the field of social media, its effect on us, especially if you're someone who was born anywhere kind of, I'd say, late mid 90s and beyond. Great book. And then the rest of these I haven't read, so Moon on the Turning Leaves by Wabgashi Rice. I want to read this book very much because I enjoyed Moon on the Crusted Snow. It was one of the top books that I read, I believe, in 2023, a couple years back now. And yeah, it deals with, I think, the Wendigo. I don't know if this one still has that same kind of creature in mind. But it deals with kind of like a post-apocalyptic setting. And like I think at this point, if I recall correctly, the main character is migrating south from like the desolate kind of cold tundra sort of climate that he was in before, and now trying to find and figure out what happened to humanity, which led to like the collapse of civilization and whatnot in this book. So it's a good series. Wabgashi Rice, I believe, yeah, you can see it on the cover. He's a Canadian author. And I believe he was also kind of sponsored by the government of Canada to write these books, or by some federal scholarship or grant money was gifted to him to do so. So yeah, it is really good. The first book I found really was terrific, so I'm looking forward to reading the second one, and that's going to happen this year. Another book comes as a recommendation from, well, kind of like BookTube, but also from a colleague that I work with as well. And that's Carissa Orlando's The September House. And what I know about this one is it deals very much with like bad housing market leads to young family buying a beautiful heritage home that is an absolute steal of a deal. But the trade-off is every September, the walls bleed and the house is freakishly haunted. And the woman who has decided that, nope, this is her home, just kind of like pulls up her socks and goes, well, if the walls are going to bleed, then I guess we're going to have to put out buckets. And I'm looking forward to reading this because it kind of sounds like horror, but with like a bit of a humorous twist. So yeah, September House. Maybe like October as a read. I don't know. We'll see. Another book that I'm actually kind of about a third of the way through right now is A Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. And this is a play on Sherlock Holmes. So it is essentially Watson is like a steampunky, futuristic character who is capable of remembering a crime scene down to the most minute detail because of enhancements that he has. So he's able to, I think it's smell a certain chemical, and then he can like imprint the crime scene on his mind. Sherlock never goes to the crime scene. She actually stays at her apartment because she finds the outside stimuli of the world too overwhelming and there's too much for her to take in. So she has Watson come to her and tell her what has happened in the crime scene, describe all the scenes, and then Sherlock will then like solve the crime based on like the details that she gets. And she's actually highly accurate. So a lot of this uses Conan Doyle's kind of previous setting in his fictitious stories from the like Victorian era. And it plays with that in some really fun ways, and I've really enjoyed it thus far. The only complaint I really have, and that this is just entirely due to me going through life changes and whatnot, is finding that like remembering all the details of this steampunk kind of futuristic hybrided world is like a little challenging. Like I can't quite recall like the name of the chemicals that like Watson has to take in to like remember everything for the most details. Or like Sherlock is a detective for like a specific like a royal monarchy of some kind, but I don't have the capacity to remember those details right now. But yeah, It's good. If someone in my life likes Sherlock Holmes and they're like, "Oh, I want to read more about that," then I'd be like, "Yeah, definitely." Tainted Cup stands out. It's really good. It's easy to read, well, more or less, but yeah. So that's that. Another one I have on my list is a fluffy, light romance called A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. Ashley Poston wrote one of my favorite books of 2024 that I read, called The Dead Romantics. This is kind of like in the same vein, but it's more fictitious, and it's a very cute fade to black romance, so it'll be fun. I'll probably read it like on the beach in the summer. Yeah. These next books are just kind of getting increasingly like more heavy, so I'm kind of like, yeah, these are nice to haves on my list, I guess. Robin Hobb's Royal Assassin. This is part of her Assassin's Quest trilogy, and this is her second book. And I've read the first book, and these are dense, like they're big fantasy books. So if you like Lord of the Rings or anything by Brandon Sanderson, you're probably gonna love Robin Hobb's writing. She is a fantastic authoress from Alaska, and this book follows Fitz, and Fitz is unique in that he can communicate telepathically with animals, but that in this medieval world or Middle Earthy kind of like fantasy realm is like taboo. Like you don't communicate with animals. It's punishable by death. You are seen as inhuman or less than human. So for a lot of his life, he kind of hides it, and he ends up working in deture to the king. He might be a king's bastard. I'm not entirely sure on that. But he kind of hides that he can communicate, for example, with his pet dog, and then later his pet horse, and then it kind of escalates. And as he moves his way through becoming the royal assassin for the court, and kind of elevates himself, by the end of the trilogy, and this is a big spoiler, but like if you've seen the covers of them, you'll know. He telepathically starts communicating with a dragon, and he ends up riding a dragon. And again, it's this whole theme that I seem to have a really soft spot for, and that's the How to Train Your Dragon narrative. And moving past that, Onyx Storm was an absolute train wreck of a book, and I could not get through it for the life of me. And that's just picking up on Fourth Wing, and I tried this year, and I just couldn't do it. But anyways, I'm gonna try this instead because it seems a little more up my alley, and it's a little more it's a little more better. Anyways. Lighter kind of Pet Cemetery. I started reading this a little while ago. It's Stephen King, obviously. It's just fun. I kind of read it when I'm like needing some downtime from like anything that's higher academic or higher thought. I just power into this for a little bit. It's creepy. It's a slow build. I haven't watched the movie, so I don't know anything about it. I just know that like a theme that occurs in this is that there is like some Wendigo-ish content. Presumably what I'm assuming is that Pet Cemetery takes place on an indigenous burial ground, and that's kind of a trope, and that's got its own problems and its own issues that I'm sure I could explore in an entire video. But for shits and giggles, I'm reading Pet Cemetery because I've never read Stephen King before. And if I'm gonna read Stephen King, it's gonna be this and The Green Mile. Okay. I got Come and Get It for my birthday this year. Come and Get It by Kylie Reid, such a fun age. It is a piece of kind of like dark academia, sort of, but not. It plays on the tropes of like the issues with fraternity and sorority culture, and like doing mischievous or like really mischievous things in school and the kind of effects of those. I don't know this story too terribly well. I just know I've been fascinated by it since I saw the cover, and it's one that I kind of have paid some attention to people's reviews, and a lot of people seem to have like very polarized, like either you love it or you hate it, and that to me really pulls me into a book, because it's kind of like, oh, like you either you've got one of two stances on it. Well, then obviously I want to read it to get my own. So yeah, Kylie Reid, Come and Get It, such a fun age. We'll see. 4 more books to go. So I got a copy of Cataloging Culture. Cataloging Culture is written by one of the professors that I studied under at UBC, Hannah Turner, and it deals with my kind of sort of like my profession in academic librarianship. We don't deal with it quite as much, but if you were to go work in like say like a museum or some other kind of place where you're dealing with more like repatriation of artifacts, etc., or even just like more of the cataloging side of things, which you do deal with so far in academia. Like, for example, I could invest a lot of time right now into like recategorizing our indigenous collection as like the Brian Deere system. But time being what it is right now, I'm not in that position at this moment, but it is on my mind. So this explores different ways to process collections in meaningful ways. It's written by someone who I know and respect, and I look forward to reading it. Dangerous Spirits is a book that entirely deals with the mythos of the Wendigo, and anybody who kind of knows me a little bit might know that the Wendigo is an indigenous myth that I've always kind of been like intrigued by. I'm fascinated by the stories that kind of surround it and kind of how it came about. And I really enjoy narratives that use it as a villain because like the cold cannibalistic creature that kind of like can parrot people's voices and lure people out into the snow to be devoured is something that is really horrifying as a concept, but it's also something that I find really just interesting because it's something that comes out across multiple different cultures. As you'll see similar beasts that are in literature repeatedly. This book is not authored by an indigenous author. It's authored by a professor out of, I believe it's Portland, Oregon, United States. I can't remember his name right now, or I can. It's Sean Smallman. And I'm looking forward to reading it. It was recommended to me by another professor that if I was interested in this, that I should pursue this book in particular. And then I also was put down a whole rabbit hole of like urban legends that I could pursue, and I would love to. I really would, but time is finite and my energy is limited. So yeah, this is on my list. Others that are akin to it, perhaps later. 2 more books to go, I promise. Cultish by Amanda Montell. I got this book through Book Outlet, and it was only like $7 or $8. So this explores, it's like something I've always been interested in is like cults and Jim Jones and small Jonestown, and how he convinced everybody to drink the Kool-Aid. And yeah, so this is a whole vibe for me. I'm also interested in how companies like Arbonne kind of like lure people in to like work in MLMs. And then 2, I've also had a few brushes with like smaller scale cults. So I'm kind of curious how they end up recruiting people and like the kind of language that's used in that. And also I'm kind of curious in like the social media sphere, what sort of cultish behaviors are taking place right now that are online that are kind of meant to pull people in and follow a certain behavioral pattern. So yeah, it's just interesting to me. It was a cheap buy. I'm familiar with the title. It's one that I also have struggled with getting a copy of from the library. So yeah. Which that on that note, I also have about 16 books coming in from my local library, and these are not titles that I'm like gonna like sit down and read cover to cover perfectly. It's more or less just for me to kind of like get up to speed and go like, okay, so like this new book came out, this is what it's about. I also have a couple books on like readers advisory and academic spaces and public spaces and blended genre, and I'm just like, I'm going to sit down with those, but like whether or not I consider it like a cover to cover like read like on my like list is probably not, but that's all besides the point. Last book, reread, Atomic Habits by James Clear. It is one of my favorites. I've read it twice before. I'm gonna give it a third read. It's just one of those kind of like, nothing in it is necessarily new. Nothing in it is meant to make you feel like, oh, like light bulb, eureka, this is something that I can do. I mean, there's maybe small bits of those kind of like brilliant isms, but for the most part, everything in here is just like a pleasant reminder for you to have about like how to positively shape your life moving forward, and like little tidbits, little tweaks you can make here and there to kind of like think of it like an oil change on your mantras as you progress through a new year. But yeah, so that's everything on top of everything else that I've got going on. Yeah, thanks for your time.